Well, welcome to the live stream. I just wanted to share with you some things I've been learning about God's will and things I've been studying in Scripture, and just share with you and read some Scripture verses and figuring out God's will for your life. And there's different stages in your life that you go through, and God's will kind of changes uh, at different stages in your life. But just kind of sharing some thoughts I had. So, a lot of times it begins with a desire. A lot of times you see a need, not just in your own life, but in a life around you. And God has placed you in a certain situation, in a certain place. And we can look at a few examples. Specifically, we're going to look at Moses. But many times it starts off as a desire. And sometimes the greater the calling, the more years it takes of cultivation and development for it to come to fruition. And Moses is kind of an extreme example. But you can see in the story, it starts off with a desire to save his people, and he ends up killing an Egyptian and then eventually fleeing. And so he spends 40 years, outside of Egypt, and spends 40 years becoming a father, a husband, a son-in-law, and a shepherd. And so it's in these times that these weren't years wasted, but times of cultivation where God cultivated that. And I just want to, read Philippians 2:13 says God's work in both you to will and do for his good pleasure. So we see that this desire started off in Moses, and a lot of times it doesn't always come out smooth sailing, right? You get the desire and it doesn't immediately come to fruition. There's a time where there's cultivation. And so while Moses was away for 40 years, God is cultivating this. And I imagine that that desire was still in Moses and he was praying through it. And this is part of the goal of prayer is for God's will to be done. And so God gives you a desire, gave Moses a desire, gives all of us a desire, but then God also cultivates it and desires to bring it to fruition. And so part of this is through prayer, where we seek God's will and pray for his will to be done in our life. And so I just wanted to share a story, a parable, and kind of connecting this to Luke chapter 14, verse 7. It says, when he noticed how the guests chose the place of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at a place of honor in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, give this person your place, and then in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you'll be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all, we'll stop right there. But the point usually when I hear a teaching on that, and it's good teaching, a lot of it's focused on being humble and not taking a place among the great. And that's very true. But the back half of that parable, it says, if you take a seat among the lower and are humble, the host might call you to the front of the table. And so many times, like Moses, God gave you that desire and that ability to carry it out, and he's cultivating that gift in you. And so sometimes he's calling you to the head of the table. And we can see this in the story of Moses. I'll read Exodus 4 here. Let me get the exact verse here. All right, Exodus 4:10. But Moses said to the Lord, please, O Lord, I have never been a man of words, either in times past or now, that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. And the Lord said to him, who gives man speech? Who makes him dumb or deaf, seeing or blind? It is not I, the Lord. Now I will go and I will be with you as you speak, and will instruct you with what to say. But he said, Please, O Lord, make someone else your agent. The Lord became angry with Moses, and he said, There is your brother Aaron the Levite. He, I know, speaks readily. Even now he is setting out to meet you, and he will be happy to see you. So my point here is that God put that desire on Moses, and God had cultivated that gift in 40 years. And now he's calling him to the head of the table, just kind of like in our parable in Luke chapter 14. And Moses is not, is arguing back with the Lord. And so I think a lot of times that happens to us. God has put that desire in us and is cultivating it. And then he's calling us to the head of the table in whatever area that may look like. And so, eventually he urges Moses along. But the point of it is it's kind of disobedience, right? I want to be careful that, here, but it's not being humble by sitting back. It's being disobedient. And so it's kind of like a false humility. And so when we look at our life, it's really God that's working in us and cultivating that. And like he told Moses, it's because they'll know that I'm with you. And so really, he's putting that desire and cultivating it, and then he's calling us to the head of the table, not for our own glory, but so that he can receive glory. And so when we actually hold back and don't step out in faith, right, it's robbing him of the glory that he's worked in us. He's given us a gifting and a calling, and he wants to use it for his glory. And so, just kind of pondering that and meditating on that, and so a lot of times, just kind of recapping, a lot of times it happens where you're looking at a need in the world around you, where God has placed you. Obviously Moses was in that specific time. And so where has he placed you? Where is a need that you see that he's wanting to work? And so that's where that desire begins. And that's where you can start to hear and understand what the will of God is when you see that need and that desire, and then allowing God to cultivate that. And there's dry seasons, like 40 years with Moses, but those aren't wasted times. Those are times that God is working that and cultivating that and bringing it to fruition. And that's what Jesus is talking about when he says, when you're faithful with little, you're faithful with much. And so it's allowing God to work that out and bring it to fruition.